My mom chose my brother's anniversary party over attending my wedding. She has ignored my achievements for years, and now she's begging for forgiveness after losing her inheritance. My mother has always shown favoritism toward my older brother Marvin over me. I can't quite pinpoint what it is about Marvin that makes him her favorite, but she has adored him since our childhood, never hiding that fact from me. When I was born, just a year after Marvin, my parents decided to give me to my grandparents to be raised by them for 8 years. My mother found it too overwhelming to care for both. According to my grandparents, my mother was going through postpartum depression, which made it difficult for her to care for both of us. They didn't put up much of a fight when my mother wanted to give me up to them, understanding the severity of her condition, and my dad couldn't manage to take care of me alone while handling his job. As a baby, I had no idea that my grandparents were not my real parents. I grew up in their loving and blissful household, feeling secure and happy. However, as I started to walk and understand words, things began to change. My parents would come to visit me occasionally, and during these visits they would explain that they were my real parents and that my stay with my grandparents was only temporary. These visits were always bittersweet and confusing for me. On one hand, I was excited to see my parents; on the other, I felt a sense of confusion and abandonment. I would watch my parents spend 2 to 3 hours with me playing and talking, but then they would bid me good-bye and leave to go back home, taking Marvin with them. This pattern continued, and it became clear to me that Marvin was always their priority. While my grandparents provided me with all the love and care they could, the brief visits from my parents left me feeling unwanted. Finally, when I turned 8 years old, my parents brought me back home. At first I was excited to return to my family and finally be reunited with them. However, the excitement slowly faded as I began to realize just how much better my life had been with my grandparents. One of the first changes I had to adapt to was sharing a room with Marvin. He had always had his own room, and there was a spare bedroom that my parents could have given me. Instead, they insisted that Marvin and I share a room so that we could bond as brothers. Marvin hated this new arrangement and made his disdain quite clear to me. If I played too loudly or read comic books that my grandparents had bought for me, whenever I tried to decorate my side of the room with drawings or posters of my favorite superheroes, Marvin would scoff and call me childish. If I brought home a good grade from school and excitedly showed it to my parents, Marvin would roll his eyes and sarcastically call me the teacher's pet. When I practiced playing the keyboard my grandparents had gifted me, Marvin would tell me I sounded awful and should just give up. Even small things, like how I organized my toys or the way I talked about my day, became reasons for Marvin to ridicule me. He would call me names like nerd or dork whenever I showed interest in reading or learning something new. Over time, I realized that the things I enjoyed doing became points of contention. The warmth and acceptance I had felt at my grandparents' home were replaced with a constant sense of tension and conflict. Marvin had a problem with everything I did, and it made me self-conscious. Imagine your older brother, someone you look up to, making fun of you for every small thing. It makes you start doubting yourself. I was too young to understand that what he was doing was essentially bullying me. I thought maybe I was the problem and just wanted to fit in with my family. I stopped reading my comic books at home and would only read them in my school library. I stopped playing with my keyboard altogether. I did all of this thinking that maybe, hopefully, my brother would accept me if I changed. Unfortunately, no matter how much I tried to adapt and fit in, Marvin's attitude toward me didn't improve. The more I tried to please him, the more I felt like I was losing part of myself. Even when I stopped doing all those things that annoyed Marvin, he would find new ways to mock me. I remember that in my childhood I had a lot of pimples due to a skin condition which has since been remedied. Marvin would constantly tell me how ugly I looked and that my face was disgusting. Hearing this was so hurtful that I would cry and go to my parents. Instead of supporting me and telling Marvin off, my mother would tell me to stop crying and be a man. Dad wasn't much help either. He would try to stay away from the matter. Mom would tell me how I needed to stand up to my brother instead of coming to her. As a result, due to Marvin's bullying and my parents' inability to make me feel safe and loved, I felt confused and isolated. I longed for the nurturing environment I had with my grandparents, where I had always felt valued and understood. My grandparents did come to visit me whenever they could, and when they did, they would try to gently talk to Marvin and tell him not to trouble me. But he never paid them any heed. Hence, most of the time, I was left alone to deal with things at home. As I started growing up, I slowly became a very angry teenager. I remember that even though Marvin was older than me, I was getting taller than him, and he did not like that at all. He would bully me about my height, calling me a giant or slender man to piss me off. However, this time, instead of asking my parents for help, I started giving it back to him by calling him a shrimp. I would also knowingly hide his books on the top shelf or above the cupboard so he would not be able to reach them without a chair, which would then give me a reason to make fun of him. He would complain to our parents, and I would sometimes get scolded, but I still felt a mix of satisfaction and guilt for retaliating. While it felt good to stand up for myself, the battles between us became more frequent and intense, with neither of us willing to back down. The last straw that proved to me exactly how much my parents favored my brother over me was during my school's annual awards ceremony. I had poured my heart into my studies and was poised to receive the top award in my class. I wanted my parents' support and presence at the ceremony, hoping for their pride and encouragement. However, just days before the ceremony, my mother informed me that Marvin had a swimming competition scheduled on the same day. Despite my ceremony and his competition being hours apart, Marvin wanted to focus on his preparation. According to my mother, he needed her more. She assured me that my dad would be there to support me. Though disappointed, I resigned myself to the idea that at least one parent would be there for me. On the day of the ceremony, I was shocked when even my dad didn't show up at the last minute. Apparently, my mom had called him urgently saying Marvin was having a panic attack before his competition and needed him there to calm him down. Dad chose to rush to Marvin's side instead of coming to my award ceremony. When I walked up to receive my award, I remember seeing no familiar face in the audience cheering me on. I felt nothing but a profound sense of loneliness and abandonment. Later, when I returned home, both my parents and Marvin were absent. I called them only to learn that they were still with Marvin. Hours passed before they returned, jubilant and celebrating Marvin's victory in his competition. He held an award in his hands as they told me how well my brother had performed. They hugged him tightly and praised his accomplishments as if it were the most significant event of the year. I couldn't shake the jealousy and hurt I felt at that moment. My parents didn't even apologize to me for missing out on my ceremony. It was a stark realization of where I stood in my parents' priorities. Despite my hard work and achievements, I was always overshadowed and unappreciated compared to Marvin. This entire experience became a turning point in my understanding of how my parents viewed us and shaped my perception of myself within my own family. I started to stop asking my parents for help or for them to be present. I stopped thinking that I could depend on them whenever I performed well in my studies or sports. I no longer bothered telling them anything. The only people I could talk freely about my achievements were my grandparents, and they always appreciated me even for small things. Their words meant more to me than any recognition from my parents ever could. When Marvin graduated from high school and was accepted into a prestigious university, my parents made a huge celebration out of it. They were bursting with pride, bragging about his achievements to everyone and hosting a party in his honor. I joined in congratulating my brother because I genuinely felt happy for him. A year later, when I graduated from high school with acceptance into an Ivy League college, my parents did nothing of the sort. In seeing this, my grandparents wanted to celebrate my achievement by organizing a small gathering with close relatives and some of my friends from school. Initially intended to be a modest affair, word spread and many more family members and friends expressed their desire to join and show their support for me. However, my parents expressed disapproval, deeming this celebration as over the top. They felt that I didn't deserve such a lavish celebration and questioned why my grandparents hadn't done this for Marvin when he graduated. That moment made me feel really angry. I confronted my mom, asking her why they couldn't just celebrate my achievements without comparing me to Marvin. Instead of hearing me out, she yelled at me and told me to stop throwing a tantrum. The fight escalated, leading to my father intervening. He took my side, but not before my mom made him feel guilty about having to host an event for me. Eventually, they decided to attend the party but spent the entire time on their phones, disengaged and uninterested. My parents had forced themselves to come, but they were more focused on gossiping and scrolling through their phones instead of celebrating my accomplishments. By the end of the night, I felt defeated and emotionally drained. Their absence and lack of enthusiasm overshadowed the joy I had hoped to share with my friends and family. It left me feeling like a stranger in my own life. As time went on, I grew more determined to create a life for myself away from my parents' toxicity. I focused on my studies and poured my energy into building friendships and pursuing my passions. The more I distanced myself, I found solace in my accomplishments and the supportive relationships I built outside of my home. Years passed, and as I prepared to graduate from college, I received the news that my mother was sick. She had been diagnosed with a serious illness and needed assistance. My parents reached out to me, asking for my help. It was a difficult moment. I felt conflicted. Part of me wanted to help her, but another part was angry about everything I had been through. Ultimately, I decided to assist them, but only because I knew my mother would need support during this challenging time. I put aside my feelings for the time being and went to help her. After the initial shock of seeing each other after so long, my mom started crying and apologizing for everything she had done in the past. She expressed how much she regretted choosing my brother over me and how she had taken me for granted. While I appreciated her apologies, I couldn't help but feel a mix of emotions. I was angry and hurt by her behavior over the years, and while her apology was a step in the right direction, it didn't erase the pain I felt. To my surprise, my dad was supportive during this time. He treated me well and helped mend some of the fractures between us. However, Marvin remained unchanged, showing no signs of remorse for how he had treated me growing up. It became evident to me that no matter how much my parents apologized, they could never truly grasp the emotional turmoil I had experienced because of their actions. Now that my mother was recovering, she began trying to make amends, but I wasn't ready to just forgive her. I wanted her to understand how her favoritism had affected me throughout my life. She seemed genuinely remorseful and eager to repair our relationship. I was torn between wanting a mother who cared for me and the need to stand my ground. The distance between my parents and me remains. I still feel like I need to protect myself from their toxic behavior, but I also recognize that my mother's health struggles are real. I continue to struggle with how to handle our relationship moving forward. Ultimately, I know that I need to prioritize my own well-being above all else, even if that means distancing myself from my parents. Update: as time passed after my mother's illness, I found myself navigating a complex emotional landscape. My mother, once a source of pain, had become someone I felt a strange mix of pity and reluctance toward. Her health struggles had undeniably changed her, bringing a vulnerability that I had never seen before. I had always known her as a strong, often demanding figure, someone whose favoritism had cast a long shadow over my childhood. Yet now here she was, frail and apologetic, attempting to mend the rift that had existed between us for so long. Initially, my visits were filled with an awkward tension. I would arrive at their home, memories of my childhood swirling in my mind like autumn leaves caught in a whirlwind. The walls that had once echoed with Marvin's taunts now felt heavy with the weight of unspoken words. I would sit across from her at the kitchen table, the air thick with an unaddressed history, and she would gaze at me, her eyes brimming with regret. It was a strange role reversal. I had spent so many years seeking approval and recognition from her, yet now she was the one looking for validation from me. "Can we start over?" she would ask, her voice quivering slightly. I could see the desperation in her eyes, a longing to reclaim the relationship we had lost. But the question hung in the air, heavy and unresolved. I wanted to say yes, to leap at the chance of rekindling the bond we once shared, but I was plagued by memories of the countless times I had felt like an afterthought, a footnote in her life. In those early days I found myself oscillating between compassion and resentment. On one hand, I wanted to help her navigate her illness and show her that I could be the son she had always wanted. On the other, I was haunted by the scars of my past years of feeling sidelined, of competing with Marvin for their attention and love. Each time I looked at her, I was reminded of all the moments she had chosen him over me, of all the times her actions had made me feel unworthy. As she recovered, my mother began to reach out more, making small gestures that I couldn't quite interpret. She would send me texts just to check in, asking about my day or expressing pride in my accomplishments. At first I found it hard to respond without feeling defensive. It was as if she was trying to rewrite our history with every message, and I wasn't sure if I wanted to allow her that privilege. Still, I reminded myself that healing required vulnerability. One day, while I was visiting, she brought out an old photo album from when I was a child. "I thought you might like to look at these," she said, her voice tinged with nostalgia. I hesitated but found myself flipping through the pages. There were pictures of me laughing at family gatherings, moments frozen in time where I looked carefree and happy. Each image brought back memories, some warm, others bittersweet. I noticed how my mother beamed in each photograph, her smile genuine and bright, but as I turned the pages, I couldn't help but feel a pang of sadness at the realization that those moments had been overshadowed by her favoritism toward Marvin. "Look at how happy we all were," she said softly, tracing her finger over a picture of us at the beach, Marvin building a sandcastle while I played nearby. "I wish we could go back to those times." "Do you really?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Or do you just wish we could pretend they didn't happen?" Her eyes widened, and I could see the hurt in her expression. "I'm sorry I was young and confused. I thought I was doing what was best." "But you weren't," I replied, the words spilling out before I could stop them. "You chose him over me, you made it clear that he was the priority." She nodded, tears forming in her eyes. "I know I can't change the past, but I want to do better now. Please give me that chance." It was in that moment that I realized I was at a crossroads. My mother was genuinely trying to reach out, but could I trust her? Was I ready to let go of the anger that had been festering inside me for so long? The question loomed over me like a dark cloud, and I knew that I had to make a choice. As days turned into weeks, I slowly allowed myself to open up to her. I shared stories from my college life, and in return she began to share her own struggles, her fears about her health. I could see the woman behind the mother, the complex person who had once seemed so distant and unapproachable. In those moments of vulnerability I began to see the humanity in her. Yet there was still a barrier between us. Marvin, ever the favored son, remained a point of contention. He would drop by during my visits, his presence instantly turning the atmosphere tense. While my mother showered him with affection, I felt like an outsider looking in, a ghost in my own family. The old dynamics resurfaced, and I couldn't help but feel that same sting of jealousy and neglect that had marked my childhood. One afternoon, while Marvin was at the house, I decided to confront him. I had been holding on to my feelings for too long, and I needed to let him know how I felt. I found him lounging in the living room, his legs sprawled on the couch, his usual arrogance radiating from him. "Can we talk?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He glanced up, smirking. "What's there to talk about? You're the one who's been doing nothing but wallow in your self-pity." "Wallowing?" I shot back, anger bubbling beneath the surface. "You have no idea what I've been through. You've never bothered to ask." He shrugged, his casual demeanor infuriating me further. "You always were the drama queen. Just get over it." It was the same dismissive attitude I had encountered my entire life. I could feel the old hurt creeping back in, but I pressed on. "You know what? I'm tired of being compared to you, tired of living in your shadow. You think everything is about you, but it's not. I've worked hard for my accomplishments, and I deserve to be recognized for them too." For a moment Marvin looked taken aback. The confidence that usually radiated from him faltered. "Whatever, man, this is just pathetic." "Pathetic? You think I'm pathetic for wanting to be treated equally?" He scoffed and got up, leaving the room without another word. I felt a mix of triumph and emptiness. I had finally stood up for myself, yet it hadn't changed anything. That evening my mother came to find me. She could sense the tension and wanted to know what had happened. I shared my confrontation with her, and to my surprise she didn't brush it off. Instead, she listened intently, her expression serious. "I'm proud of you for standing up for yourself," she said. "You deserve to have your voice heard. I've let Marvin's behavior go unchecked for too long, and it's time I put a stop to it." Her support felt like a small victory. I realized that for the first time she was not only acknowledging my struggles, but also validating my feelings. It was a step in the right direction, and I could see a flicker of hope for our relationship. Over the following months I continued to visit my mother, and we began to establish a new understanding. The conversations grew deeper, and I learned more about her life before motherhood, her dreams, her fears, the pressures she had faced. It was a slow unraveling, but it was healing. I began to feel the walls around my heart slowly crumbling. Meanwhile, Marvin's presence remained a thorn in my side. He continued to boast about his life, but I found myself less affected by his taunts. With my mother's support, I felt more empowered to push back against his bullying. I no longer needed his approval or validation. Eventually, the time came for my graduation from college, a significant milestone that I had worked tirelessly to achieve. As the day approached, I felt a mix of excitement and anxiety. Would my parents finally recognize my accomplishments in the same way they had for Marvin? When the day arrived, my heart raced as I entered the auditorium. I spotted my mother and father in the audience, their faces filled with anticipation. But my breath caught in my throat when I noticed Marvin sitting next to them, his smug smile infuriating me. As I walked across the stage to receive my diploma, I scanned the crowd. My parents cheered for me, and for the first time I felt a swell of pride in my accomplishments. It was a bittersweet moment, joy mingled with the awareness of all the struggles that had led me to this point. After the ceremony, my parents rushed over to congratulate me, and I could see genuine pride in their eyes. My mother embraced me tightly, whispering how proud she was. It felt good, but I also felt a twinge of caution. I wanted to believe that things had changed, but I knew that actions would speak louder than words. In the months following my graduation, the family dynamics continued to shift. My mother made an effort to create more balance, trying to ensure that I was recognized alongside Marvin. She initiated family dinners where we could share our lives, aiming to foster a sense of unity. At first, these gatherings felt strained, each conversation laced with unspoken tensions. Marvin often brought up his achievements, eager to reclaim the spotlight. One evening, during a particularly tense dinner, my mother decided to switch things up. "Why don't we each share something we admire about the others?" she suggested, her voice hopeful. I glanced at Marvin, who rolled his eyes, but eventually begrudgingly agreed. As we went around the table, I felt a mix of anticipation and dread. When it was my turn, I took a deep breath and said, "Marvin, I admire your confidence. You know how to command a room." It was honest, albeit tinged with frustration, but it was a start. Marvin smirked, but seemed caught off guard by my compliment. "Thanks, I guess," he mumbled. When he spoke about me, his tone softened, albeit briefly. "You've worked hard for your degree, that's impressive." My mother's eyes sparkled with approval, and I felt a flicker of hope. These small moments began to chip away at the walls between us, however slowly. Over the next few months, still old habits die hard. During one dinner, Marvin made a snide remark about my choice of career, clearly attempting to undermine my confidence. Instead of retreating, I responded calmly, "I'm passionate about what I do. That matters more than your opinion." The tension crackled in the air, but my mother chimed in, defending me. "You need to respect your brother's choices, Marvin. He's following his own path." It was a turning point. For the first time, I saw my mother take a stand for me. As the days turned into weeks, we began to forge a new understanding. My mother continued to reach out, sharing more about her own experiences and the challenges she faced as a parent. I listened, realizing that her past decisions were influenced by her own struggles and insecurities. As summer rolled around, I found myself feeling lighter. I took on freelance projects related to my field, and each small success gave me a sense of accomplishment that I hadn't fully embraced before. My mother celebrated these milestones with me, proudly displaying my work on the fridge, a gesture that deepened our bond. One weekend, she suggested we visit the beach where we had spent so many summers as a family. I hesitated at first, but ultimately agreed, knowing it was a place steeped in memories both good and bad. When we arrived, the salty breeze carried the echoes of laughter and the sound of waves crashing against the shore. We walked along the shoreline, our feet sinking into the sand, and I found myself reminiscing about the past, about the joy of building sandcastles and splashing in the waves. "Remember when Marvin got stung by a jellyfish?" I laughed, and my mother joined in. "He was so dramatic." In that moment, I felt a weight lift. We were no longer just mother and son. We were two people sharing a history, slowly rebuilding a connection. As we watched the sunset paint the sky with hues of orange and pink, I realized that healing takes time, but we were moving in the right direction. However, the road wasn't without bumps. Marvin continued to test the boundaries of our newfound harmony, often making sly comments that threatened to unravel our progress. One evening, during another family dinner, he turned the conversation to my career aspirations, belittling my ambitions with a casual disregard. "Really, you think you'll make it in that field? It's a tough market," he sneered. My heart raced, but I felt the strength of my mother's earlier support. I met his gaze firmly. "I believe in myself." The table fell silent, and my mother, visibly upset, intervened. "Marvin, enough. You need to be more supportive of your brother. This is not how we treat family." Marvin's face flushed with frustration, but for once he didn't argue back. Instead, he shrugged and changed the subject, a small victory for me. As weeks turned into months, I was learning to embrace my own worth, independent of Marvin's shadow. Each small confrontation became an opportunity for growth, and my confidence began to flourish. Eventually, I decided to host a small gathering of friends at my place. I wanted to create a space that felt distinctly mine, a reflection of who I had become. I invited my parents, wanting them to witness my world outside of their expectations. When the night arrived, my apartment buzzed with laughter and conversation. I felt a mix of excitement and nerves as I introduced my friends to my parents. My mother embraced the atmosphere, chatting easily, while Marvin loitered, unsure of how to fit in. As the night progressed, I caught my mother laughing genuinely, free from the heaviness that had once clouded our relationship. It was a revelation, a sign that we were both evolving. I watched as she and Marvin engaged in friendly banter, a dynamic I had never seen before. At one point I overheard my mother complimenting me to a friend. "He's really found his passion. I'm so proud of him." Her words struck a chord deep within me, resonating like a melody I had longed to hear. After my friends left, my mother lingered for a moment. "You did a great job tonight. It's wonderful to see you happy." "Thanks, Mom. It felt good to share this part of my life with you," I replied, feeling a surge of gratitude. That evening marked a turning point for us. I realized that while the past would always be part of our story, it didn't have to define our future. As I lay in bed that night, I felt hopeful, ready to embrace the complexities of our relationship. In the following months, we navigated the ups and downs together, each day presenting new challenges and opportunities for growth. My mother continued to be supportive, and I found myself more willing to forgive and let go of past grievances. Our journey wasn't linear, but it was ours, filled with moments of laughter, vulnerability, and a deepening understanding of one another. With each step forward, I discovered that healing, while often painful, could also be beautiful. And as I ventured into my new career, I carried the lessons of the past with me, determined to create a life defined by authenticity and love. Ultimately, I embraced the ultimate lesson that connection is forged through understanding, patience, and the courage to confront the past head on. Final update. As the months passed, my relationship with my mother continued to blossom. We found ourselves growing closer, and the lingering shadows of the past slowly faded. Our conversations became more meaningful, filled with laughter and genuine curiosity about each other's lives. I realized that the effort we both put into healing our relationship was worth it. One evening, while flipping through old family albums, my mother turned to me, her eyes glistening with nostalgia. "I'm so glad we've worked through things. I wish I could go back and change how I handled everything when you were younger." "Mom, I appreciate that, but I think those experiences shaped us into who we are today. I wouldn't change them even if they were painful," I replied, feeling a sense of closure. Marvin remained a challenge. While our interactions improved, he still struggled with his own insecurities. However, I chose to respond differently this time. Rather than seeking his approval, I focused on my own path. I took pride in my achievements, sharing my successes with friends and family, including my mother. When I received a promotion at work, I invited my parents to celebrate. My mother beamed with pride, and for the first time, I felt Marvin's reluctance to compete with my happiness. Instead of belittling my success, he acknowledged it, albeit begrudgingly. "Congrats, I guess you're moving up," he said, his tone surprisingly neutral. I smiled, appreciating the small shift in our dynamic. As I settled into my career, I also focused on my relationship with Claudia. We became a solid team, navigating challenges together and supporting each other's dreams. One day, as we were enjoying a quiet evening, I took a deep breath and shared my vision of a future together. "I can see us building a life filled with love and understanding. Would you consider marrying me?" Claudia's eyes sparkled, and without hesitation she said yes. As we embraced, I felt a rush of joy and affirmation of everything I had fought for in my life. Planning the wedding was a beautiful experience. This time I wanted my mother to be involved, and she eagerly jumped in, excited to help with the details. We bonded over flower arrangements and guest lists, our shared laughter creating new memories. On the day of the wedding, the air was filled with love and warmth. My parents were both present, their smiles genuine as they witnessed the union of Claudia and me. As I stood at the altar, surrounded by friends and family, I felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. My mother stepped forward to give a speech, her voice trembling with emotion. "Today, I see not just a wedding but a celebration of love, resilience, and growth. I'm so proud of you both." Tears welled in her eyes, and the room was filled with applause and cheers. As I exchanged vows with Claudia, I felt a profound sense of completion. I had learned to let go of the hurt from my childhood and embrace the love that surrounded me. Our journey was marked by challenges, but each step had brought us closer together. In the months that followed, I realized that family dynamics were complex and ever evolving. Marvin continued to struggle with his sense of self, but I chose to be a supportive brother rather than a rival. I invited him to join us for outings and gradually encouraged him to share his own passions. Through this process, I learned that healing isn't just about mending relationships, it's about fostering understanding and acceptance. I embraced the idea that love can transcend past grievances, allowing us to create new memories together. Eventually, I started a family of my own with Claudia. When our first child was born, my mother was there, overflowing with joy as she cradled her grandchild. In that moment, I felt the circle of life come full circle, new beginnings, emerging from old wounds. I had come to understand that love, in its many forms, can heal even the deepest scars. The journey was far from perfect, but I learned that it's the effort to bridge divides that truly matters. In the end, I found not only a loving partner in Claudia, but also a renewed bond with my mother and an evolving relationship with Marvin. As I watched my child take its first steps, I felt hopeful about the future. I wanted to create a nurturing environment, ensuring my own child would always feel valued and loved. With each passing day, I embraced the lessons I had learned, committing to building a legacy of compassion and understanding for generations to come. And so my story continued, woven with the threads of love, resilience, and the courage to confront the past, a testament to the power of healing and the beauty of family.